Welcome to our Wednesday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today I'm continuing to teach verse by verse through the book of Hebrews, and we're now in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 7. Man, I've already covered a lot of material, and we're offering this brand new book. The first time I've ever offered this was during this series. It's a 200-plus page hardback copy, and this is actually the footnotes from my digital living commentary, which I've written commentary on over 27,000 verses in the Bible over the last 40-something years. And this is the portion that deals with the book of Hebrews in this hardback book. And then we have CDs and DVDs that are taken from my television program. And then I have a USB that will have the audio and video on there. And we're offering all of these products today. This book of Hebrews is powerful, and there's no way I can go back through everything that I've said. If you've missed any of this, we have it archived on our website, and you can go and watch all of the archived teaching. But the book of Hebrews is just absolutely powerful. It's foundational. If you're going to be a mature Christian, you must know the things that are in the book of Hebrews. And as a generalization, the Old Testament law was teaching that you related to God based on your performance. The New Covenant is teaching that you relate to God based on Jesus' performance and faith in what He did for you, not how you are living for Him. Now that's a generalization, but that's kind of an overview of the whole book. And so the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, is talking about all of these Old Testament people. And it's going back and showing you that it wasn't their actions that made them accepted with God. It was their faith. Now, their faith did produce actions, but their faith wasn't perfect. They didn't perform perfectly, but their faith was there. And so this is what Hebrews chapter 11 is showing, that it was faith that caused all of these people to be accepted with God. And now in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 7, it says, "By faith Noah, being warned of God of things not seen as yet, moved with fear, prepared an ark to the saving of his house, by which he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness which is by faith." We talked about that at the end of my program yesterday, but again, it's talking about it was faith that caused Noah to please God. And you know, Noah is another example of a person who was mightily used of God. I mean, without him, there wouldn't have been any life left on the earth. All of the animals and people would have been destroyed. And yet, Noah wasn't a perfect person. After they came out of the ark, he planted a vineyard and got drunk and was actually uncovered in front of his children. And he got drunk and he was naked. He didn't do things perfectly, and yet this was a man who was used of God. This is, again, not advocating sinful living, but it's just showing that nobody has ever pleased God perfectly with their actions. It has to be your heart attitude. And, you know, I can relate this to myself, that I guarantee you, I long to live for God with everything that I've got, and yet I don't do it perfectly. Now, I don't go out and live in gross sin and things like that, but I am saying that I can't relate to God based on my own performance. I depend upon my faith in what Jesus did for me as the foundation of my relationship with God. Now, I don't go live in sin because I know that Satan will take advantage of me if I do. I know that people would come against me, and I could stand to lose everything if I just go out and start living in sin. But when it comes to my relationship with God, it's not my actions that I depend upon to make me accepted with God. It's faith that pleases God, just like Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 says. In verse 8, it says, "By faith Abraham, when he was called to go out into a place which he should after receive for an inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. By faith he sojourned." So the point again is that it was Abraham's faith that, yes, there was actions that went with it, but did you know his actions weren't perfect? Without me going into a long teaching about Abraham, it says that Abraham was living in Ur of the Chaldees when God first spoke to him. And God told him to leave his father's house and all of his brethren and go out to a land that he would later be shown which land that was. Did you know he didn't obey perfectly? He came out of Ur of the Chaldees, and they lived in a place called Haran for a while, and his father was with him. The Lord told him to leave his father and his father's house and all of his brethren. He obeyed partially. He didn't do it perfectly. He went out with his father. And then even when his father died and he was finally free to leave Haran and he started wandering through what we now call the land of Israel, did you know he still brought his nephew with him, Lot? And I believe the reason for that is because his brother died and his nephew probably was real young and was looking towards Abraham as being, like a father figure. And so you could sit there and justify it, but it was still contrary to what God told him to do. God told him to leave his father's house and all of his brethren. Lot was one of his brethren, and he did not obey fully. He came out partially and stayed with his father for a while. When his father died, then he still brought Lot with him. And it was only in Genesis chapter 14 when Lot finally separated from him and went down to the area of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was totally separate from Abraham. Then is when God started speaking to Abraham and says, "Now I will bless you and make your seed as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sand on the seashore." So yes, Abraham had actions. He did obey, but it wasn't perfect obedience. It wasn't his performance that made him accepted with God. It was his faith. And that faith eventually affected his performance. So I'm not saying that there is a total disconnect and that you just relate to God by faith and your performance, your actions don't count at all. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that your actions have to be a fruit, a byproduct of the relationship you have with God by faith. Faith is what pleases God. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, and that's what all of these verses are talking about. It's trying to emphasize this and to show you the book of Hebrews had made a lot of radical statements about that the Old Testament law was weak and unprofitable and it's ready to vanish away. And because of this, some people might think, well, then, man, the Old Testament law was just all wrong. No, it was temporary until this new covenant came. But even under the Old Testament law, what he's doing is going back and showing you that people under the Old Covenant, it was their faith that always made them accepted with God, not their performance. And so he used Abel as an example. He used Enoch as an example. He used Noah as an example. Here he is using Abraham as an example. Every one of these people were not perfect in their actions, and yet God blessed them because of faith, because without faith it's impossible to please God. So that's the point that he's making here, and he's using these people as examples of this. In verse 10, still talking about Abraham, it says, "For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God." And the point that's being made, the Lord told him to go out and he would later inherit something, but Abraham wasn't just looking for a physical city. He was looking for God. He was wanting to establish God's kingdom here on this earth. God had given him promises about his seed, and he was looking at beyond just the physical things, and he was looking at spiritual things. And I tell you, this is so important. When we're talking about faith, which is Hebrews 11 is the faith chapter, you need to see beyond just physical things. You need to be looking beyond just a house, a car, physical things. You need to be looking to establish God's kingdom here on this earth. And Jesus said it this way over in Matthew chapter 6. He says, "Seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and then all of these things, these physical things, will be added unto you." You know, if you will put God's kingdom first, God will take care of your kingdom here on this earth. You know, I hadn't got time to give you all of the examples of this, but Jamie and I have put God first in our life and in our marriage. We've now been married for 52 years, and we have been seeking God and building God's kingdom. And did you know we have lived without, there was a lot of our friends that were buying houses, but I just knew that God told me that we were traveling and doing things, and I didn't want to be tied down. It says over in 2 Timothy chapter 2, it says that no man that wars entangles himself with the affairs of this life, that he may please him that has chosen him. And so because of that, for about 15 or 20 years, Jamie and I rented houses, didn't buy a house, because we knew that at any moment God would tell us to move and to go to places. Eventually, when the Lord sent us to the Colorado Springs area, He told us we could have a home, and we bought a home. But we built this home, and it was only a $60,000 house. Anyway, I don't want to go into all the detail, but the point I'm trying to make is that we have done without. We weren't seeking to build our own kingdom. We were seeking to build God's kingdom. And for our entire married life, 52 years, we have just been putting God first. And God has taken care of us better than we would have ever have taken care of ourselves. We eventually got that original house that we built paid off. God has given us a brand new house that is exceeding abundantly anything that I would have ever asked or thought. Did you know just a couple of days ago, I got a brand new car given to me, and it's not the first one. I mean, I have given away probably over a dozen cars, and I've probably had a dozen cars that have been given to me. And I've got another person that I'm buying a car for in just the next month or so. And those aren't what I'm seeking. I'm not seeking a fancy house, a fancy car. That's not what I'm seeking. But God has blessed me. When I put first the kingdom of God, He has taken care of me better than I would take care of myself. And that's what these verses are talking about with Abraham. He wasn't looking for things just in the natural. He was wanting a heavenly city. He was seeking to build the kingdom of God. He lived in tents, and he was a nomad, and he moved around. But because he believed God and obeyed Him, God took better care of him accidentally than Abraham would have ever taken care of himself on purpose. And the same thing is true for me, it's true for you, it's true for every one of us. If you will put first the kingdom of God and seek His benefit and seek to do what He wants you to do, He'll take care of you. You know, when I first got really turned on to the Lord, I got drafted, I went to Vietnam, and when I came back, I just took a job working in the school system. And anyway, I was a college dropout. I believe that God told me to drop out of college. That's not what He had for me. And so my mother was really concerned that I was never going to have any finances. I'd never have anything. And I got this job with the school system, and they liked the work that I did. And I remember my boss coming to me and offering me a guaranteed position like a supervisor in the school system, working over film and production type of things. And he offered me a guaranteed salary with retirement. This is when I was like 19 or 20 years old. And he offered me all of these things. My mother just thought, this is awesome. This is back before I was married. And she thought, man, this has to be God to give you an opportunity like this. But you know what? I didn't know the details, but I knew that somehow I was going to be in ministry. And I had to give this guy a 5-year commitment for him to put me in that position. And I told him no. I said, I know God's got something else for me. And my mother, other people thought that I was crazy to turn down an offer like that for a college dropout. But you know what? I was putting first the kingdom. I was doing what Abraham did right here, where he was living in tents. He left all of whatever riches and what his family had acquired in Ur of the Chaldees, and he went out not knowing exactly what was going to happen, but he was seeking God. He was following what God told him to do. And as a result, God made Abraham so plenteous that actually kings came to him and said, you're mightier than our entire nation right here. And they asked him to leave because he was overwhelming them. Did you know we've actually had the people in Woodland Park, Colorado, where I live, talk about kicking us out of the city because we have overwhelmed them? Our income is like 5 times as much as the entire city's income, and we've had some of those same reactions. And it's because I've been putting God first. The same thing will work for you. If you will put God first, it may look at the moment like it's not going to work to your benefit, but I guarantee you seeking God is always better than seeking your own thing and trying to do your own thing. I tell you, I'm saying these things not just to nobody. There's some specific people watching this program right now that you're in a quandary about what to do. In the natural, it looks like you need to pursue some things, but that's not what's in your heart. That's not what God is telling you. And based on these scriptures, based on my own personal testimony, I'm just telling you that you need to put God first. You need to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. And if you'll do that, all of these other things, what you eat and where you sleep and what you're clothed with, all of your physical necessities will come as a byproduct. And it will be more abundant than if you were to go out and just lean under your own understanding. I believe that's a word from God for people today. So in verse 11 it says, through faith also Sarah herself received strength to conceive seed and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. You know, in the Old Covenant scriptures in Genesis, it doesn't give a whole bunch of information about Sarah. It shows one time that the angel said that she was going to have a child when she was 90 years old, and it had already ceased to be with her after the manner of women. And so this would have been an absolute miracle. And when she heard that, she laughed. And it wasn't a laughter of joy and peace. It was a laughter of like unbelief, like how could such a thing happen? And the angel actually wound up rebuking her. So Sarah wasn't the perfect example, but according to this verse, she did eventually believe what God said. And it was her faith as well as Abraham's faith that caused them to have a child when she was 91 years old and Abraham was 100 years old. Again, we could go into so much more detail on all this. Romans chapter 4 talks about this in greater depth and talks about how Abraham, against hope, believed in hope so that he could become the father of many nations. And this is just a great example about Abraham and Sarah. It was faith that caused them to conceive and have a child when she was 91 years old. And did you know Abraham's faith, it wasn't just a momentary burst of faith that he was able to have a child when he was 100 years old, because after Sarah died, he went on and married again, and he lived to be 175 years old, and he had multiple children, over a dozen other children besides just Isaac and Ishmael. And so, I mean, it was faith that caused him, his body to revive so that he could have children even up into his hundreds. Man, that's awesome. So it was all because of faith. And you may be barren, and it may seem like whatever you need in your life, it's just impossible. Maybe it's beyond, natural realm. But man, faith can make anything possible. Jesus said, all things are possible to him who believes. So there are people watching here today, and it seems like you're facing some impossibilities, but if you would trust and believe God, nothing is impossible to him that believes. So in verse 12 it says, therefore sprang there even of one, and him as good as dead, so many as the stars of the sky in multitude, and as the sand which is by the seashore innumerable. That's exactly what Genesis 22:17 says. The Lord told him after he had offered Isaac his son as a sacrifice, he was willing to do that. It says that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of the heaven, as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And so it all came to pass. And these scriptures are showing you it's faith that produced that. Now, it wasn't faith alone. James chapter 2 says you see that how it wasn't faith alone, it was also actions. But faith is the thing that pleases God. Actions are a byproduct of faith. Man, I could spend a lot of time on this. I'm just going to say this quickly, but when you teach on faith like this, there are some people that think, well, if I'll go out and act in faith, like say, for instance, throw away their medicine or do something, that action will make faith come. And there are examples of people that have gone against the medical practice, and because of it, they've died. You know, what's wrong with that is that they think that actions produce faith. All of these verses are saying the exact opposite. It's faith that produces actions. And if you ever get this mixed up, then the people will go out and think, well, then if I'll just act like Andrew did, if I'll do this, well, then maybe that'll be faith. Faith will come. No, your actions don't produce faith. but your faith will produce actions. When people come to me and say, should I quit my medication? Should I go off of these things and just believe God? I tell them, if you're having to ask me, then you really don't believe God. When you believe, there comes a point when you know that you know that you know that it's a done deal, then it would be appropriate for you to go off of your medicine and do things like that. But it's not your actions that's going to produce faith. It's your faith that's going to produce actions. And this is what this is talking about. Because Abraham and Sarah believed God, therefore they saw all of these promises come to pass. In verse 13, this is Hebrews 11:13. These all died in faith, not having received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. Boy, there's a lot in this verse. I'm probably not going to get through all of this on today's program. But notice that it says these all died in faith, not having received the promises. Did you know Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and you could list many of the descendants, in their lifetime, they never did see the land of Israel become theirs. They were living in tents like nomads, and they just traveled around, and they did not own the property. The only property that they ever owned was a small portion of land that Abraham bought from the people of Heth so that he could bury his wife there. And so he had a tomb there. And that's the only property that they ever owned. And it was only after they came out of the land of Egypt with like 3 million Jews. This is many generations later. As a matter of fact, if you go back into Genesis chapter 15, where the Lord made the promise and cut this covenant with Abraham, it says that the iniquity of the Amorites wasn't full yet, and it would be a full 400 years later before the Jews would actually own that promised land. And so for 400 years after these promises were made, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, many of their descendants never saw all of these things happen. It was only 430 years later that they actually got this promised land. Boy, when you think about this, this makes us look puny in comparison that they were able to stand throughout an entire lifetime. Abraham lived to be 175 years old, and he never saw anything more than just this one cave that he bought to bury his wife in. That's all the property that he ever owned. And yet he believed the promise that someday his seed would be as numerous as the stars in the sky or the sand on the seashore, and he believed and stood in faith, and he never saw it come to pass in his lifetime. How in the world can we sit there and become so impatient that if we pray and don't see something happen within the next minute or two, we just give up on our faith? That's not the example that's being given here. I'm out of time. I'm going to deal with this tomorrow in more detail, but I've got this hardback book on the book of Hebrews that we're asking for a donation of some amount for, and then we have these CDs and DVDs and also a USB. Please listen, and our announcer will give you information about how you can receive these today.